Hi, I'm Dr. Sho, and today I'm going to be introducing us to the pharmacology of the autonomic nervous system. Now, remember that the nervous system is divided into two: the central nervous system, consisting of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, consisting of the cranial nerves, the spinal nerves, and their branches. The peripheral nervous system again is further subdivided into two: the autonomic and the somatic components of the peripheral nervous system. Now, our discussion today will be on the autonomic nervous system. At a later date, we'll discuss the somatic nervous system. The ANS is subdivided again into two: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic components. Earlier literature included the enteric nervous system as a subdivision of the ANS, but this is no longer considered to be the case in contemporary literatures. Now, the autonomic nervous system, what exactly does that word autonomic nervous system, what does it mean? What is autonomic nervous system? The autonomic nervous system is that portion of the nervous system that controls the visceral functions of the body. And these visceral functions of the body include cardiac function, blood pressure, sweating, respiratory function, and other functions that are not under the control of the individual. So these are the functions that are under the purview of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic component of the ANS is otherwise referred to as the thoracolumbar division of the ANS. And why is it considered the thoracolumbar division? It's because the preganglionic fibers of the ANS emerge from axons that lie in the CNS, extending from T1 to L3. And as these axons emerge, they synapse, the preganglionic fibers synapse with neurons that lie in the sympathetic ganglia. And these neurons that lie in the sympathetic ganglia may be prevertebral, that is, they lie in front of the aorta, or paravertebral, lying on either side of the vertebral column, or might be terminal. Now, there's one thing we should note here. Because the sympathetic ganglia is so close to the spinal cord, it follows that the preganglionic fibers in the sympathetic division are usually shorter than the postganglionic fibers. And this is an important difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic components of the ANS. We should also note that the adrenal medulla is considered to be a part of the sympathetic division of the ANS, not only because all the preganglionic fibers that innervate its cells originate in the thoracolumbar region of the spinal cord, but also because it originates from the neural crest. So what happens when the sympathetic division is stimulated? Stimulation of the sympathetic division of the ANS cause changes that prepare the body for emergency situations. And these changes include increase in contractility of the heart, increase in heart rate, shunting of blood from the skin, mucosa and abdominal viscera to skeletal muscles, and others. So this component is otherwise referred to as the flight or fright component of the ANS, because if you look at those changes that occur after stimulation of the ANS, they are changes that tend to prepare the body for flight or for fight. They prepare the body for emergencies. Then the parasympathetic division is otherwise referred to as the craniosacral division. Why is it called the craniosacral division? It's because of the origin of the preganglionic fibers. The preganglionic fibers originate from the midbrain, from the medulla, and also from the spinal cord. From the midbrain, we have we have fibers originating from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the third cranial nerve. Then, from the medulla oblongata, we have the parasympathetic components of the seventh, the ninth, and the 10th cranial nerves. Then, we also have fibers originating from S2 to S4. And these fibers that originate from S2 to S4 proceed as preganglionic fibers to form the nervi erigentes, which supply the rectum, which supply the urinary bladder, and which also supply the sexual organs. Another thing we should note about the parasympathetic division is that the peripheral ganglia of the parasympathetic division are located close to or within the innervated structures. Therefore, the preganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic division are usually longer than the postganglionic fibers. Contrast that with what we have in the sympathetic division. And stimulation of the parasympathetic subdivision of the ANS cause restorative and conservative changes like decreased heart rate, decreased contractility of the heart, increased gastrointestinal motility, decreased sphincter tone. It's also important for us to note that structures like sweat glands, pilomotor muscles, and most blood vessels in the body receive only sympathetic innervation, whereas all the other organs receive innervation from the two components of the ANS. Stimulation of the sympathetic division of the ANS tend to have widespread sustained effects on the body. And why is this so? The first reason is that a single neuron in the sympathetic division arborize extensively with several other neurons, whereas neurons in the parasympathetic division do not network so extensively. Another reason is because, if you remember, we said the adrenal medulla is a part of the sympathetic division of the ANS. So, secretions of the adrenal medulla are directly into the blood, from which it can be carried to distant sites in the body to exert effect. Whereas for the parasympathetic subdivision, the secretion acetylcholine is directly into the synapse. Therefore, the effects are more local. Another reason is biochemical. This is because noradrenaline, which is the neurotransmitter of the sympathetic subdivision, takes a longer time before it gets hydrolyzed, before its effect is terminated. Unlike acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter of the parasympathetic subdivision, which is rapidly hydrolyzed after release into the synaptic clefts. So these are the reasons for the differences in the effects, in the duration of effects, and on the extent of the effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic subdivisions. Acetylcholine and noradrenaline are the major neurotransmitters of the autonomic nervous system. And acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter for all preganglionic autonomic fibers, whether sympathetic or parasympathetic, as long as it is autonomic preganglionic fibers. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is also the neurotransmitter for some sympathetic postganglionic fibers, which are referred to as cholinergic sympathetic fibers, whereas majority of sympathetic postganglionic fibers express noradrenaline. One thing that is crucial to our understanding of ANS drugs is the effect of stimulation of the different components of the ANS on the different organs in the body. Once we are able to inculcate this, it becomes easy for us to predict the pharmacologic effects of drugs acting on ANS. It becomes easy for us to predict the therapeutic uses to which such drugs can be put, and it becomes also easy for us to predict what will be the likely adverse effects of such drugs. There are some of these effects that must be at our fingertips. This, number one, the effect of stimulation of the different arms of the ANS on the eyes. We must understand this very well. We must also understand the effect of stimulation of the different components on the heart, on the respiratory system, and on the digestive system, and probably on the urinary system. It's key that we understand the effects of stimulation of these different components on those organs that I mentioned. So, for the heart, stimulation of the sympathetic subdivision will cause a cardioacceleratory effect, whereas stimulation of the parasympathetic component will cause a deceleration or will have an inhibitory effect on all the components of the heart. For the gastrointestinal system, in the intestine, stimulation of the parasympathetic subdivision will cause increased motility, increased tone, increased secretion, whereas stimulation of the sympathetic component will have an opposite effect. On the respiratory system, stimulation of the sympathetic component will cause a relaxation of the trachea and bronchial smooth muscles and will cause a decrease in the secretion of the bronchial glands. Stimulation of the parasympathetic component will have an opposite effect. On the eyes, stimulation of the sympathetic division will cause mydriasis, whereas stimulation of the parasympathetic division will cause meiosis. Then stimulation of the sympathetic division will cause a slight increase in secretion by the lacrimal glands, whereas stimulation of the parasympathetic component will cause a quantitatively higher increment in secretion by the lacrimal glands. So it's important that we remember all this. The next thing we need to know is that the two arms of the ANS tend to act as physiologic antagonists in most instances, such that if one arm augments a function, the second arm will inhibit that function. Now let's quickly look at general principles of chemical transmission. Just the way human beings communicate, cells to communicate, although cells don't have mouths, so they cannot talk, and then they don't have hands to signal, but cells still communicate, and their communication can be electrical or can be chemical. And the basic units of the nervous system are called neurons. And neurons communicate at junctions which are called synapses. So the communication can be by exchange of ions or can be by use of hormones or neurotransmitters. So, what are the steps involved in chemical transmission? First, uptake of precursors, because the precursors are not resident in the neurons. So the precursors have to first enter the cell for the transmitter to be synthesized. Then other steps are listed here, and the last step is termination of the action of the neurotransmitter. And at the next lecture, we'll describe some of these steps in greater detail. Thank you for watching. You find some practice questions and their answers in the last 3 slides. Please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you require mentoring, personal coaching, further explanation, research, and others, please feel free to contact me via WhatsApp on the number there. Thank you.